By 1860, nearly 4 million black people were living under slavery in the United States. The money they earned was taken by enslavers, families were torn apart through sale, and even the few possessions they managed to save could be gone by the next morning.
Yet inside that brutal system, they still used knowledge, experience, and trust to create ways of earning and protecting money. Today, those same ideas appear in investment networks and help companies generate billions of dollars. So ask yourself, how did people, denied control over their own lives, develop strategies that now drive billion-dollar industries? And how many American fortunes were built on black intelligence, while the people behind that intelligence were denied?
The profit, the recognition, and even a place in history. This is Hidden Black Chronicles, and together we bring buried stories back into the light.
Now let's uncover 10 money-making strategies used by enslaved black people that are still shaping wealth today. Number 1. Sou-Sou, rotating savings circle. Today, all it takes is a phone. People can go to GoFundMe to ask for support, use Kickstarter to raise money for an idea, or join an online savings group. These platforms are often seen as products of the digital age, places where hundreds of small contributions can be gathered into enough capital to change someone's life.
But long before the internet, the basic logic behind these modern platforms had already existed within many West African communities. The system was known by different names, including Sou-Sou, Sou-Sou, and a Sou-Sou. The way it worked was simple. Say 10 people joined together, with each person contributing $100 every month. In the first month, one person received the full $1,000. The next month, everyone contributed again, but the money went to the second person. The cycle continued until all 10 members had received the full amount once. In some Yoruba communities of West Africa, this practice was known as Sou-Sou. In Ghana and other parts of the region, people were more familiar with the name Sou-Sou. When Africans were forced across the Atlantic, they could not bring their land or property with them. But they carried knowledge about how to live, how to organize a community, and how to help one another through hardship. In the Caribbean, the practice survived under names such as partner, box hand, and Sou-Sou. The surviving records do not allow us to claim that every enslaved community in the United States organized Sou-Sou exactly as people do today. Plantation ledgers often recorded cotton, sugar, tobacco, and the price placed on every person who was sold. Yet they rarely recorded how enslaved people shared sunny food or support in their everyday lives.
So why can history remember the exact price placed on an enslaved person, yet barely remember how that person may have helped a neighbor survive? Picture an enslaved woman who managed to sell a few eggs, some vegetables,
or something she made after finishing the labor demanded of her. That small amount of money was not enough to buy cloth, sewing tools, or goods she could resell. But when several people placed their limited earnings into one shared fund, one member could receive a larger amount that same month. In the rounds that followed, the person who had already received the money kept contributing, so someone else could have the same opportunity. There was no bank building, no credit file, and no wealthy investor standing behind them. What kept the circle going was each person's reputation and the responsibility they carried toward the group. What makes this remarkable is not only the way the money was organized, but the conditions that made such a system necessary. People whom society described as incapable of managing their own lives understood how to spread risk, pool capital, protect trust, and distribute money in an agreed order. When banks did not exist for them, or later existed, but refused to treat them fairly, black communities built their own financial systems out of trust. Today, GoFundMe and Kickstarter work differently from Sou-Sou. GoFundMe usually depends on donations that people do not expect to receive back. Kickstarter helps a project raise money from people interested in supporting it. In a Sou-Sou, every member contributes, and every member eventually receives the full fund once. The closest modern comparisons are savings circles, lending circles, and cooperative credit institutions. If a company today can become wealthy by gathering millions of small contributions, what should we call the people who
who understood the power of that principle generations earlier.
Number 2. Collective freedom buying. In 1855, Elizabeth Keckley had to pay $1,200 to the family that legally owned her in exchange for freedom papers for herself and her son, George. Under the slave laws of that time, a child inherited the status of the mother. Because Keckley was considered property, her son was also treated as property from the moment he was born. She could not simply gather him in her arms and leave St. Louis, because the law did not recognize either of them as having the right to decide the course of their own lives. Keckley was a highly respected seamstress whose dresses were sought after by wealthy women. Her work had value, and customers were willing to pay for her talent. Yet that skill still did not make her the legal owner of her own labor. After struggling to find a way forward, several women who had hired her agreed to lend her the full $1,200.
Keckley used that money to purchase freedom for herself and her son, then kept working until she had repaid every dollar. At first glance, this may look like nothing more than the story of a loan. Beneath it, however, was a way of organizing money that Black communities had been forced to understand early. When one person could not raise enough alone, many people could place their resources behind one goal, allowing one person to become free, earn more, and eventually return to help those who remained in bondage. Money used to purchase freedom could come from many places. Some of it came from wages saved over years of hired labor. Some came from sewing, selling food, practicing a trade, or taking additional work whenever possible. The remaining amount might be covered by loans from customers, donations from churches, assistance from free Black people, or small sums carefully saved and sent by relatives. Each contribution might have seemed insignificant on its own, but together, those contributions could become enough to carry one person out of slavery. John Barry Meacham offers another example of how that pooled money could continue creating opportunity. After purchasing his own freedom, he worked to buy freedom for his wife and other relatives. He later became a minister, educator, and community organizer in St. Louis. In some circumstances, skilled workers, such as seamstresses, blacksmiths, carpenters, or people with reliable employment connections, might be considered first, because, once free, they had a better chance of earning money quickly. What stands out is the way these communities understood capital. The money was not divided into portions so small that no one had enough to change their circumstances. Instead, it was concentrated on one clear goal: producing a result first and then using that result to widen the possibilities for those who came next. Today, the investment world calls a similar arrangement an investment syndicate. Several investors pool their money to back a business that none of them could fully finance alone. If that company grows, the value it creates flows back to the group. This method of combining capital has helped modern investment firms and entrepreneurs build companies worth billions of dollars. Enslaved Black families had no investment offices, no shares of stock, and no contracts protected by law. What they had were limited earnings, valuable skills, and relationships strong enough to hold a shared purpose together. In modern finance, pooled capital is used to purchase a stake in the future of a company. For Elizabeth Keckley and many others of her time, it was used to buy back a future the law had placed on the market before they were ever given the chance to choose it. Number 3. Secret garden trading. By the late 18th century, records from several Virginia plantations showed landowners purchasing eggs, chickens, vegetables, and other small goods from the very people they enslaved. On the surface, that detail may seem ordinary, but behind it was a contradiction that is hard to ignore. After spending long hours working the enslaver's land, some enslaved Black people used the little time they had left to tend small garden plots, then sold whatever they could spare to earn money for themselves and their families. Those plots did not truly belong to them. An enslaver could take them back at any time, and the right to carry goods to market still depended on someone else's permission. Even so, many families grew vegetables and medicinal plants, raised chickens, or made goods they could trade. They kept part of what they produced to improve their own meals, then sold the surplus to nearby households at local markets and sometimes even back to the enslaver's family.
A few coins earned from eggs or vegetables could not change a life overnight, but they could buy food or be saved towards something larger. For some enslaved people, that money helped support relatives. For those given the rare chance to purchase their own freedom, every small coin could become part of the price they had to pay to be recognized as free. The method closely resembles what many personal finance courses teach today. Lessons that have helped white entrepreneurs build wealth. Begin with whatever resources you have, create something extra, sell it, keep part of the profit, and reinvest it to expand your income. Today, people call this a side hustle, a micro business, or bootstrapping. Modern entrepreneurs have used the same basic principle to turn small activities on the side into major companies, sometimes businesses worth billions of dollars. For enslaved black people, however, that side hustle did not begin after a paid workday. It began after a day of labor whose value had already been taken by someone else. The small garden became one of the few places where they could try to hold on to a portion of what their own hands produced, even though the land, their time, and their right to sell remained under the enslaver's control. Today, books about building wealth often tell people to turn their spare time into income and use small profits to create larger assets. Black families understood that principle long ago. The difference was that they had to practice it in a world that barely allowed them to own anything at all. From a row of vegetables, a few eggs, or a single chicken, they created something the system had tried to keep beyond their reach: money they could choose how to use. Number 4. Intercropping, multi-crop farming. During the 18th century, the rice fields of the South Carolina and Georgia Lowcountry generated enormous wealth for plantation owners. But behind that wealth stood the labor and knowledge of enslaved black people. Many West Africans, forced into the American South, already carried generations of experience with crops, seasonal flooding, moisture control, and ways to use one piece of land to support several kinds of plants at once. Instead of planting a single crop across an entire field, they could grow different plants that supported one another. Taller crops provided shade, lower plants covered the soil. Some varieties helped hold moisture, while others produced food at different times of the year. If one crop failed because of pests or weather, the others could still help a family survive a season of scarcity. Today, those principles are known as intercropping, polyculture, and multi-layer farming. Not every intercropping method used in the South can be traced directly back to Africa. Still, research on rice history and ecological knowledge shows that enslaved Africans did not arrive empty-handed in terms of expertise. They understood plants, soil, and water in ways many plantation owners depended on, especially as the coastal rice economy expanded. In the small garden plots near their living quarters, Black families also grew vegetables, beans, medicinal plants, and other foods on the same piece of ground. Part of the harvest improved their own meals, while the surplus could be sold or traded. A small plot could therefore provide more than one harvest. It could offer food, medicine, and a little money at different points throughout the year. That way of thinking is remarkably close to how modern agricultural companies speak about optimizing land, diversifying products, and reducing crop risk. Permaculture, regenerative agriculture, and many ag-tech companies continue to develop systems that grow several crops together, use data to organize space, and turn each section of land into multiple streams of income. Today, those same principles can be packaged as technology, intellectual property, and highly valued businesses. Meanwhile, the knowledge of the Black people who kept crops alive, helped the land remain productive, and made plantation wealth possible, often appeared in the records under a single word: labor. They did not own the land, and they did not receive a fair share of the wealth their work helped create. Yet the way they understood a field, not as a place for only one crop, but as a living system capable of feeding many people and producing many forms of value, is still being used by the modern world today. Number 5. Community money circulation. By the early 20th century, the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, was home to banks, hotels, restaurants, and hundreds of black-owned businesses. It later became known as Black Wall Street, not only because so many businesses stood close together, but because money earned within the neighborhood was often spent there again, moving from one store to a family and then back into another local business. A worker might eat at a black-owned restaurant. The restaurant owner might buy advertising in the local newspaper. That newspaper would pay its employees, and those employees might spend their wages at a pharmacy, tailor shop, or grocery store in the same neighborhood. Each transaction kept another share of wealth within the community, helping someone find work, giving another business a customer, and allowing more families to consider opening businesses of their own. People often repeat the claim that a dollar in Greenwood circulated between 36 and 40 times before leaving the community. There is not enough reliable primary evidence to treat that number as an exact statistic, but the image behind it still points to something real. Greenwood survived because black businesses and black customers supported one another in an America that often denied black people fair access to loans, property, and white commercial districts. Today, economists call this principle the local multiplier effect. Buy local campaigns are built on the same idea, encouraging people to spend within their communities so that money can continue supporting local jobs, services, and businesses. Large corporations understand the power of such an ecosystem very well. They build supplier networks, cultivate loyal customers, and reinvest profits to expand their reach. Long before these ideas appeared in business textbooks, the people of Greenwood were already living by that principle. They did not wait for a fair market to be handed down to them. They built a neighborhood where one person's dollar could become the next person's opportunity. Number 6. Trading skills instead of money. In the 1830s, Frederick Douglass worked in Baltimore's shipyards and was paid for his skilled labor. Yet, that money did not belong to him. Under the laws of slavery, the man who claimed ownership of Douglass had the legal right to take the wages he earned, even though Douglass himself had done the work. His story reveals a bitter contradiction. The marketplace recognized the value of black skill, while the law refused to recognize a black worker's right to keep that value. When cash was controlled, enslaved people had to find other ways to meet their daily needs. A blacksmith might repair tools in exchange for food. A seamstress might trade her labor for cloth. Someone skilled in childcare, cooking, herbal healing, or repairing household goods could receive another service in return instead of money. These exchanges often took place within families, living quarters, local markets, or among people connected by trust. Today, the same basic principle appears under newer names, such as the gig economy, skill exchange, and time banking, where a person's time or ability can be converted into services, income, or community credit. Some technology platforms even use tokens to record and exchange value among users. These systems did not grow directly out of the economy of slavery, but they rest on a familiar understanding. When money is not the only option, skill itself can become a form of capital. Technology companies have turned the connection between skilled workers and people who need their services into platforms worth billions of dollars. Long before there were apps, algorithms, or platform fees, black people denied the right to keep their own wages, understood that hands capable of useful work could still open a path toward survival. Number 7. Secret apprenticeships. In the early 19th century, inside the carpentry shop at Monticello, John Hemmings spent years making furniture, carriages, and other objects that demanded extraordinary precision. He lived enslaved under Thomas Jefferson, yet the skill in his hands had been shaped by something no property ledger could ever fully measure: the memory of those who came before him, the mistakes made and corrected over time, and the quiet techniques that could only be learned by standing beside an older craftsman long enough. Across many other places, trades were passed down in much the same way. A father showed his child how to control the heat of a forge so the metal would not turn brittle. An older woman taught a younger girl how to measure cloth, hide a seam, and save every usable scrap. A carpenter placed an apprentice's hand against a wooden board so he could feel the direction of the grain before bringing down the plane. Not every lesson had to be passed in secret.
Enslavers sometimes arranged vocational training because a skilled worker could produce more profit and command a higher price. Yet, during those hours in the workshop, black craftspeople gave one another far more than the owner required.
They shared ways to protect the trade, avoid waste, find work, and survive if they were ever carried off to a place where no one knew their name. Money could be taken. Tools could be locked away. A family could be separated by a single sale. Still, the craftsperson taken somewhere else carried the knowledge of how to build a table, repair a plow blade, or cut a dress to fit.
At times, that knowledge held in memory helped someone trade for food, earn a little money, or find a place in the world when freedom finally came. Today, corporations call this mentorship, apprenticeship, and knowledge transfer. They build training programs, hire specialists, and spend large sums to keep the experience of one generation from disappearing when workers leave. Black craftspeople understood that long before those terms entered corporate manuals.
Every technique placed into a younger pair of hands was a small piece of the future sent ahead, held there in case the family could no longer stand together tomorrow. Number 8. White label production. When an object leaves the workshop, it usually carries the name of the person who sold it. The person who spent hours at the pottery wheel beside the kiln or at the workbench can disappear from the story altogether. During slavery, that happened to many black craftspeople. David Drake, an enslaved potter in South Carolina, was one of the few who left a trace of himself behind. On the large vessels he made with his own hands, Drake carved dates, lines of poetry, and sometimes even his name into the wet clay. They were only a few small marks, yet nearly 2 centuries later, they still tell us who truly stood at the wheel. Most craftspeople were never able to leave their names behind in that way. The pottery, furniture, metal tools, and carriages they produced were often sold under the name of the workshop, the plantation, or the enslaver. Customers remembered the brand, while the hands that gave the product its quality slowly disappeared into the shadows. Today, that arrangement is known as white label production. One party makes the product, while another places its name on it, markets it, and sells it. Private label retail and dropshipping have allowed many entrepreneurs to build enormous businesses without directly making the products themselves. Black craftspeople of that era created the kind of quality the market was willing to pay for. The only difference was that when the product left the workshop, their names usually did not leave with it. Number 9. Underground economic intelligence networks. At crowded ports, small marketplaces, churches, and gathering places where hired-out black laborers crossed paths, news often traveled through conversations that sounded completely ordinary. A sailor returning from another city might know where goods were selling for a better price. A woman coming home from the market might carry a warning that patrols were watching a familiar road, or that a certain merchant was known to cheat people when payment was due. Those pieces of information were not written into reports, nor did they appear in any official record. They moved from one person to another through families, friendships, and relationships built on trust. In a world where black people faced control over both their movements and their wages, knowing who was buying, where work could be found, what counted as a fair price, and whom not to trust could help them protect the little they had managed to earn. Today, the financial world describes that kind of advantage as an information edge, a private network, or an investor circle. On Wall Street, those who receive information early often see opportunity before the broader market reacts, and closed networks like these have helped build enormous fortunes. Long before information became something packaged and sold as paid data, black communities preserved it through memory, quiet messages, and the care they took to look out for one another.